Hello, I'm Jim Cornell, and this is Base to Base, the weekly biotech podcast from Air Coastal Media. Yes, welcome again to the Base to Base biotech podcast, and this is number 57, and it's going live on May the 1st. I've had an enjoyable week so far with my son as he's working with me as part of his work experience from school. Hopefully it's not put him off forever. Nice weather helps though. Last week we chatted with Bruce Lucher from Nervati Neuroscience and Grin Therapeutics and with Daniel Fitt of Immunic. This week it's Uwe Diegel, CEO of Lifeina, about their cooling technologies, and with Dirk Beher, CEO of FundaMental Pharma, about treatment-resistant depression. If you do have news or suggestions for who should be on the podcast, or indeed any other suggestions or comments, please do get in touch at jim@deeptechdigest.com, which is also the address you can use if you're interested in advertising with us, sponsoring a podcast episode or more, or for event coverage. First, it's time to go through some of the headlines of the articles you may have missed over at deeptechdigest.com. We had an article on a hidden mechanism in DNA damage, ADHD-related traits may intensify chronic pain, and a new lung cancer model reveals tumour location shapes the immune response. Antibodies offer hope for autoimmune diseases. There's a promising cell model for dementia research, and Japanese pharma companies are shifting to earlier CDMO outsourcing. An experimental drug protects the body from the harmful effects of gluten. Researchers have identified the key protein in the inflammatory response to infections, and there is a new target for cancer treatment. Vaccine strategy induces broadly neutralizing HIV antibodies. Aerogen has launched India's first women-led chemistry synthesis laboratory, and Pfizer's drug improves progression-free survival for patients with relapsed or refractory multiple myeloma. And you can read all of these and plenty more at deeptechdigest.com. So first this week, FundaMental Pharma is a preclinical biopharmaceutical company focused on developing new treatments for treatment-resistant depression. To tell us about what's in the company's pipeline, we have Dirk Beher, CEO of FundaMental. Hello Dirk, thanks so much for being on this week's episode. Perhaps first you could give us some background on the company.
Yeah, I think the company is a small molecule CNS drug development company. We are based in Heidelberg, Germany, and I think the way we operate is in a very capital efficient manner. It's like a semi-virtual model. So most of our activities are outsourced, but we have a lab and we have scientists there. And I think the key point is our lead asset, FMP374, is at the IND enabling stage and is being developed for treatment-resistant depression. And the reason why we chose that was mainly data-driven. We have very nice preclinical data there, but it's also a substantial commercial opportunity and can get us quite quickly to proof of concept. And we're currently raising a Series A financing, and the idea is to support the up to proof of concept, the clinical studies, and we anticipate already after 18 months to have a biomarker readout and then a proof of concept in 3.5 years after the closing of a financing. So that's in a nutshell who we are.
If we can take a little step back to the actual conditions that you're working on, I wonder if you could tell me a bit about the challenges of dealing with treatment-resistant depression.
Yeah, it's quite challenging. You can see already by the name, they are treatment resistant. And I think some people, even in the literature, when you look at this, they call the patients pseudo-resistant. So essentially, they go through a substantial treatment journey. It's not linear. It's like they get first line treatment, second line treatment, then they get other things happening, and then they probably end up where they are classified as treatment resistant. And this is about 30% of all the patients of major depressive disorder. That's kind of a substantial population. And with this comes the challenge, because it's a very, very heterogeneous group. We don't know why they don't respond. This is not like a disease where you can have diagnostic criteria and you can select the patients which are more suitable. It's more that the physicians have to try out. They try one of the drugs, patient doesn't respond, and the next. And as you know, the SSRIs and SNRIs, which are the first line treatments, they take a while to work. They take like at least 3 weeks of dosing until there's a benefit. So I think that makes it quite challenging. And that's also why there is such a high unmet need. I think that's the key here, because I think the conventional things don't work. So we need to have novel entities there. And as you know, there is Spravato, which is ketamine, is on the market, but beyond that, as a current standard of care, there's not much else available on the pharmacotherapy side.
Is there a lot of variation between people with treatment-resistant depression?
Yeah,
Of people?
it's a spectrum. It's everything. That there can be, this is essentially, I think my simplistic view, this is a change of neuronal circuits, and neurochemistry in the brain. And that can have a number of different reasons. There can be an underlying disease, there can be inflammation, there can be so many different things undergoing it, or personal events, and that makes it so heterogeneous. But I think we don't have like buckets where we can say, okay, we do these diagnostic criteria and we put them, then this drug will work. That makes it so challenging for them to work on.
Because of those challenges, are there a lot of companies working in this space? And if so, what are they doing?
Yeah, I think there is quite a number of people. I think when you think about the field, this has been paved by Spravato. This was taking the ketamine, taking the more active enantiomer, which is esketamine, developing an intranasal application. It's not an oral application, intranasal, that also reduces the abuse liability, and it has to be done at the doctor's office, and then people have to be monitored. So that's the current standard of care. And then we look at what else is happening. So since esketamine targets the NMDA receptor, there's quite a few people working on any NMDA receptor targeting drugs, and mainly trying to improve the oral bioavailability of ketamine. So there's a couple of companies, they have like delayed release formulations or whatever to give it orally. And then obviously we have a new mechanism where we have a combination of a channel block and a secondary pharmacology where we disrupt the interaction of the NMDA receptor with another ion channel called TRPM4, which gives us an edge, because we then can have a drug that doesn't have the side effects of esketamine. And on the other side, we have the psychedelics. You probably have seen the announcement from the US government that they like to accelerate the development there. So we have all the psilocybin, etc., derivatives. And I think they are main focus right now. I think that's the biggest competitor out there are these these companies working on psychedelics, and they have a different, mode of action. They go via the 5-HT2A receptor, and also they require much less frequent treatment. So it's probably like a couple of sessions or even one session they're looking at, to get a benefit. But I think that's kind of the space. I think many people in the space, what we see is are focusing first on major depressive disorder. I think that's when you see quite a number of these companies out there at the moment.
And so what in context of what you're doing, what's the relevance of N-methyl aspartate receptors?
So the receptor itself, it's a quite abundant receptor at the synapse, and it's a critical channel. So what it does, it opens when the neuron is activated, and I think it lets in calcium, and calcium triggers a secondary messenger cascade downstream. So you get things like neuroplasticity, long-term potentiation, etc., with the NMDA receptor. So it's actually a very complex biology behind it. It's not just there to propagate the electric signal, it's there to really help to maintain the synapse formation, etc. And we also know that it's also killing neurons, because if you have excessive activation, which you may have in potentially Alzheimer's disease, etc., you get actually neurons dying. But I think the bottom line is N-methyl aspartate is glutamate, which is a major neurotransmitter in the brain. So that's why the receptor is so important.
As far as FMP374 is, how does that work, and how is that relevant here?
I think that's a very exciting story. I think that was the scientific founders, Professor Barding and Dr. Jan, who actually is our head of biology or research. They found that you can develop compounds which can actually disrupt this complex between NMDA receptor and the other ion channel called TRPM4. And that's highly neuroprotective. And I think what we found out now is that our compounds have this dual pharmacology, so they can bind to the NMDA receptor, which blocks the channel like esketamine. At the same time, they also disrupt that interaction with TRPM4. And when we look at our data, that seems to give us an edge when we look at the side effects, because we can work at much lower target engagement at the NMDA receptor and still get the same kind of efficacy without sedation or dissociation equivalents in humans in the preclinical species. So I think it's, for us, the way we look at it, it's this dual mechanism. We are doing two things, so block and complex disruption. And what we also have shown now is that we have very potent neuroplastogens. So in vitro, we have like nanomolar compounds that can promote synapse formation, BDNF secretion, etc. So, and that's unique to the mechanism, is our view. And we haven't worked out all the details for sure. There's still a bit of work to be done, but I think we have a high-level picture how this works. And it's mainly driven by the data we have in the preclinical models. We know when we dose our compounds, they're efficacious and they have up to 10 or 20-fold margins over sedation, dissociation, equivalent behaviors in the animals, in the preclinical studies.
What are you looking to for the end result for patients? I mean, what is this going to do for patients?
Yeah, I think that there is a rating scale where we actually measure depression as the Montgomery-Åsberg rating scale. And I think what we're looking for is obviously changes there. I think what we want to do is we want the patients to respond quickly. That's the difference also for the NMDA receptor targeting drugs. They work immediately, within the PK, so within the exposure of the compounds within hours. Or days, that you don't have to wait for weeks for them to work. And I think we are really looking for relief. We want to have them do better on these rating scales. At the end of the day, that's the primary endpoint here, which is a measure of depression. And I think that's what we're looking to improve. And I think at the beginning, most of these things are done as adjunct therapy. So the medical experts tend to keep the patients on the same drugs they are already taking. And then you come in with your treatment-resistant depression drug on top. And then at some point, you probably can work out whether your drug alone is sufficient, in the development path there.
And could you tell me about the administration, like how it's done and also how often that needs to be done?
Yeah, I think for us, we have developed an oral drug, so pill. And I think we are preparing for every day, once a day, but in reality, this may be just twice a week, because what we know with these type of drugs, they change the synapse formation. They can remodel a little bit how the brain operates, and that is a long-lasting effect. So you may not need them every day. But I think we're preparing for everyday dosing based on the development program. And we would then test this out in the clinic, to see whether less frequent dosing is also beneficial, But it's definitely oral. I think that's what we're looking to do. And I think the other point to make is based on the profile, meaning that we have less of these side effects, which are detrimental. We are looking to have something people can take at home. That's the ultimate game, that they don't have to go to the doctor being supervised for 2 to 3 hours. That's a bit of a nuisance to patients, and essentially they lose the whole day when they have the treatment day for the current standard of care.
And so you already have preclinical data. Could you tell me about that and also where that places you on the clinical trial pathway currently?
Yeah. I think the data are usually done in the typical models you have for depression, and what we are looking for is a pharmacokinetic, pharmacodynamic response, and also efficacy. So we are really fine-tuning, the exposure, at what exposure we're seeing efficacy and what exposure we're seeing the undesirable effects. We have this all mapped out, so that's very clearly mapped out. We have also done a lot of work on the neuroplastogen story, to show that we are actually changing synaptic proteins in the brain. And also in vitro. So we have a system of primary neurons, which is our unique platform, where we can actually study this initially, and then we can also show in the living brain these things change accordingly. So we have quite a wealth of preclinical data, and then you end up obviously with your dose predictions, etc. What you would want to do in humans. What we haven't got yet, because we are at the IND enabling stage, we haven't done the 4-week mandatory tox studies yet. That's still coming. But we have done some sort of exploratory studies already that give us comfort to go forward.
Does this have any other applications beyond treatment-resistant depression?
This is interesting because I think when you go through the literature, I think these compounds were initially developed as neuroprotectants, because when you disrupt TRPM4 and NMDA receptor, you also can prevent cells being killed by glutamate. One way we can look at neuroprotection, we could look at some of the neurodegenerative diseases. It's less favorable. We also have data in a glaucoma relevant setting. But I think what we are looking right now is more the questions, where is a drug that modifies synapses quite important? And I think this is where we end up with neurodevelopmental disorders. You have autism, schizophrenia, and also PTSD could be on the list, because I think we could potentially have a benefit there. These are all speculative statements now, I have to say. We haven't done any experiments yet, but I think on paper there could be more use. And not forget major depressive disorder, because I think it's a natural thing. You try first treatment-resistant depression, and then for the major depressive disorder, the bar is much higher for your drug to be absolutely clean, because they have to take this every day, and they don't want to have any side effects, and I think you would first start there and then go into major depressive disorder. And I think one point to mention is we all talk about the Inflation Reduction Act. So we would not take the same molecule. We have backup molecules which we would then select and go forward. So I think we are very cautious how we can develop this in the future to also have the commercial angle always in mind.
Do you see FMP374 as being a standalone treatment, or do you see it being something that could be potentially used in combination with other treatments?
Yeah, I think we first probably look at adjunct. That will be the first, and then we would try and reduce it to be used on its own. So I think that's probably the approach, stepwise, and I think that is kind of what other people have done in that field as well. You first add it to treatment-resistant depression patients where they're already on certain drugs. And once you see that you have your safety margins, the drug works, then you explore it in other indications like major depressive disorder, etc. So I think the perfect outcome would be that it's standalone, rapidly acting standalone treatment.
And obviously that brings up all of the regulatory pathways. Is that still way into the future, or are you thinking of that already?
You have to think about it, but I think as a small company at the early stage, this is something we have to develop now within the company, that comes also with future hires. But it was very interesting to see what the US administration is doing, that they are giving preference now that psychedelics get like tickets for faster processing. I think that could occur as well for this kind of approach eventually. I don't know, but it's speculation right now, but we don't know that. And I think we are very well aware of the whole path that has been laid out by esketamine. So I think we have studied this in very great detail, because it's also clear based on the public documentation, what the regulators were worried about and what they liked. That's very clear when you look through these packages. They are available now, in the public domain.
Is it a field, do you think, that's been neglected, or is it something that is well covered by companies both now and in the past?
Yeah, I think we have gone through developments. I think when I look in retrospect, we obviously had those drugs in the early days, SSRIs, SNRIs, there's like, I think 8 to 10 drugs more, and everybody was high on. And then there was a phase where people tried new mechanisms that didn't actually work very well. So I think now the field has come, I think that's at least the view I share with some of the leaders, is we have come to the conclusion, let's focus on biologically validated targets and mechanisms, because by doing that, we de-risk the whole process, and then we can also come up with major advantages and advances to the field. And I think that's happening now. I think you see, when I look at the psychedelics, there's the typical psychedelics, and then you have these companies, they're saying we have psychedelics, they are not psychedelic anymore. You're getting rid of the hallucinations, The same here, what we are trying to do. We want the efficacy, maintain the efficacy of the drug, but get rid of the sedation dissociation. But we are still working on the similar targets, but we have slightly different pharmacology and different profile of the compounds. And I think that's where this is going. And I think that also eventually will give us much more credibility because it will lead to a number of approvals, is my conviction here, going forward. And I think that's how the field has gone, from being very fashionable and down to, okay, it's a graveyard, nothing works in depression. Now things are coming back, they're actually working. It's kind of when you look in retrospect a little bit in the field.
Is the introduction of AI for new targets and new drugs for those targets, is that making a difference in this field?
You're talking to someone who views things like everything is helping. I don't think AI will replace things. AI is helping us. I think eventually it will probably help us to look at the data better, and find better ways to stratify patients. So the answer would be, I'm sure it will help. But when you look at what is in the clinic, these are still so-called old-fashioned hardcore pharmacology, medchem optimized compounds that have been developed with the help of AI, because we always have done computer-assisted drug design, etc. So I think overall it's contributing to the whole package. We will see how it, at the end, what AI will do in drug development, whether it can replace completely the lamp or not. I'm more on the side, okay, it's a really useful tool and it will make things easier, but you still need to have some good old pharmacology and some experiments being performed. But that's a personal view.
And I know it's one of those things where you mentioned you're a relatively small company. You don't want to overextend yourself, but are there any other things that are in your pipeline or things that you're looking at?
Yeah, I think what we're doing, we are looking more, we have a specific mechanism which is fairly unique. I think this is our differentiator. And I think, as I mentioned before, the key is to look what would be the best indications beyond TRD and then move forward there. I think where we are right now, we are not looking to in-license immediately new programs or new indications, but this may happen as well as the company matures. But as of today, it's not a priority. Today, we are quite focused. So today, the focus is FMP374 into the clinic and as fast as possible to POC. And then secondly, find other very good indications for our mechanism, and then come forward with another molecule.
Do you have any timelines in mind? Obviously, you can't be exact, but in terms of clinical trials and maybe down the road for
this
commercial?
is all connected to financing. That's the trouble. And it's a tough environment. So I think I would say hopefully we can enter the clinic in something like end of next year or spring after 2028, something like this. But it all depends on how fast we will be able to raise the capital we need, at least to get to phase 1. That's kind of all depending on that. I think what I can say, I think we will be in the clinic 15 months from the close of a Series A. I think that's our timeline. So to be very fast, and the team is preparing. So essentially, the way this works is you get all the quotes from all the CROs. They can do the CMC, and then they will do the tox studies. And I think that's all there already, so that once the financing is closed, we can actually sign the contracts and get started.
Are you also looking to partnerships?
Yeah, in today's world, you do everything in parallel. It's clear. I would say I'm still very excited about the biology, because we have these aspects of known pathways, but we have the whole biology of neuroplastogens, being able to grow new synapses or strengthen them, etc. That makes it, I find this also biologically a very interesting field. It's not based only on the drug development side, etc., but it's also on the biology going forward. It's very much applied biology.
Depression is a terrible condition, and when there seems to be no option available, it's even worse. So what FundaMental is doing is excellent news. Also giving hope where people desperately need it is a company based in France, Lifeina. The concept was born, as is often the case, out of a personal need, but we'll let the company's CEO, Uwe Diegel, tell the story. Hi Uwe, thanks for being with us. Fantastic to have the opportunity to chat with you today. And so maybe we could start with that story about the origins of the company.
Oh, it was an amazing coincidence because I was making medical devices. I was born in New Zealand and I grew up in South Africa, and I moved to France in 2002. And my brother Olaf, he stayed in New Zealand where he became a professor of advanced decisional data science. And when I moved to Paris, my brother thought, I must go and visit my brother in Paris. So he came all the way from New Zealand. And I know it sounds romantic and trite to say this, but I mean, the best inventions are always caused by personal need. He doesn't speak a word of French. I mean, my French is not perfect, but I've been living here for 20 years, so I got used to it. So he arrived from New Zealand and he went to the south of France to some little auberge, a little village in the middle of the lavender fields, which was all beautiful and everything. And he's an insulin-dependent diabetic, and I don't know if you know that insulin has to be kept cold. So he gave his insulin to the hotel because there wasn't a fridge in the hotel room as planned. So he gave his insulin to the hotel, and he tried to explain that they had to put it in the fridge, and they accidentally put it in the freezer by mistake. So at 11 o'clock at night, when he came down to get his shot for insulin, it was frozen. He could have died, but of course we are in France where there's always a solution and there's always a 24-hour pharmacy. So he managed to go to the pharmacy and get some fresh insulin, and it saved the day. But he came back to Paris after his holiday, and we thought that's a bit of a stupid reason to die. And it was really just for fun because I was making medical devices at the time, and so I have all the facilities in terms of making samples and prototypes. And we put our heads together, we put the idea of a portable fridge together that would be small enough that you'd be able to transport your insulin and keep it cold. In our head, it worked, so we made a sample. I stole the battery from my Sony video cam to make the sample. That's how rough it was. And I ordered the components off Amazon, or the equivalent of Amazon. Amazon didn't exist yet. And I just made a sample. And it worked. It didn't work very well, but it was really a good concept. Again, we just made it for fun. We hadn't really thought about it. But then every time we showed it to somebody, they would go, ooh, it's fantastic. And then we won the NASA competition for design for human applications. And we started winning all kinds of prizes and articles. And then the British TV did a thing on us on the TV. And it went from there. And then we put our heads together and we said, we really actually need to make a proper fridge. And we founded a company called HealthWorks that started making all kinds of solutions for the transport of medication. HealthWorks is today the worldwide leader in the transport of medication using isothermal bags. So we manufacture all the packaging, the isothermal packaging for the pharmaceutical industry. Then about 5 years ago, we launched a new model of the fridge. It's a plug-and-play device. You just take it out of the box, you switch on the battery, and it keeps cold. Simple as that. And we were voted as best startup in the world in 2018 at the Web Summit. And we started selling it, and people go crazy. And it's the first time in my life, Jim, that I make a product that people actually thank me for buying a product, which is amazing. Because I really feel that I'm useful. I feel that because it's not just insulin, it's growth hormones, it's anti-TNF, it's arthritis, it's IVF, it's Crohn's disease. And basically anybody who has a chronic disease is defined by his pathology, because a chronic disease means that you will have it for the rest of your life. Chronic means that there is no cure. There is no cure for diabetes, just like there's no cure for Crohn's. You can treat it, you can take care of it, but you cannot fix it. So people will have that medication for the rest of their lives. And when you think of mothers who are using growth hormones that also need to be kept between 2 to 8, where the child is prisoner of his medication, he cannot travel, he cannot go anywhere because the medication has to be kept between 2 to 8. So we are really offering freedom to these people, and it's just a really nice feeling.
How does the technology work?
Very interesting question. It's using a thing called Peltier effect, which was invented by a French guy whose name was Jean-Athanase Peltier. He discovered this amazing scientific curiosity that if you take cubes of metal and you weld them together, cubes of different density of metal, and you weld them together, you put an electric current through it, the friction caused by the different density when they rub together will cause super hot on one side and super cold on the other side, which is vulgarly called the Peltier effect. It wasn't really used in industry because if there's the slightest air bubble between the cubes of metal, the air has got a different density, so it expands more rapidly. And inevitably, on an old Peltier effect, if you use it for more than 80 hours, it will just pop. It will stop working because the air would expand and would break the Peltier effect. So I thought that's a really nice technology that can produce a lot of cold for very little energy. So we decided to revisit the manufacturing of Peltier effects, and we put a patent on manufacturing Peltier under vacuum. So we now have perfect stability on the Peltier effect, and it's we stopped testing it after 5,000 hours of use. It was interesting because the first prototype that I made of the fridge, I used the Peltier effect that I bought off the shelf, and the first prototype lasted exactly 80 hours before it burnt out. I have devices now that are running since 2018 that are still running perfectly well.
So in terms of the energy, that doesn't ever need to be recharged, replaced?
So the Peltier itself is actually quite a robust technology. It uses a little bit of energy, but produces a lot of cold. So I can use a standard lithium battery because the battery technology has really progressed over the last 5 to 10 years, and it's still progressing today. I mean, I've just managed to actually make a version of this fridge with USB, which is amazing because basically the maximum amount of energy a USB port is going to give out is 380 milliamps, and now I can actually run a fridge off that. So basically it's running about 500 milliamps per hour, which is about the same as a parking light for a car, which is nothing. It's got a built-in battery of 6 hours, but for me the battery is really more for what I call it's an emergency battery, because I didn't build this for traveling. You can, of course, travel with it. But for me, I find it much easier to take an airplane with an isothermal bag. I mean, I wish, Jim, I could just snap my fingers and tell you I had one universal solution that would be good for any kind of travel, but I haven't found it yet. And I mean, what I mean by isothermal bag is this is a bag that will keep between 2 to 8 degrees for 24 hours. And it's just so much easier to put this bag in your suitcase than to travel with a fridge. But the problem with this is after 24 hours, you need to refreeze the gel packs. The best way is to have a combination of both. So you take the airplane with this, and then you arrive at the hotel and you plug in your fridge. It goes to the right temperature within 15 minutes. You transfer your medication inside. For hotels, this is great because the hotel fridges are really crap. A normal hotel fridge is about 12 degrees, 13 degrees, and this kind of medication really needs to stay between 2 and 8 degrees. As I said, I don't have one magical solution, but I have a solution tailor-made for everybody.
Is it something that you can adjust the temperature, or does it just stay at the particular?
Technically, I can adjust the temperature. It's easy to do, but for regulatory reasons, I don't give the possibility, because if people set it at the wrong temperature, I would be responsible for the temperature of the medication. So it's set to be always between 2 to 8. I have a target temperature of 6 degrees, and I've given myself 2 degrees latitude on the application. So if it says 6 on the application, it's actually 4 inside. I just put the 2 extra degrees just for safety. So it's connected to an application because, of course, nowadays everything is connected. So to check the temperature, you just open the application. You can just automatically see what the temperature is. It's a simple plug-and-play device.
Are there increasing number of applications or things that are kept at those temperatures? So is it becoming more useful over time?
Well, more and more of the new medications are what they call biologic medications. So most of the new medications are heat sensitive. So the market is ever expanding. All the COVID medication, for instance, all the COVID vaccines had to be kept between 2 to 8 degrees. We did a lot of work during COVID. Of course, like a very clever person, I launched a Lifeina box, a solution to help people to travel on the day that COVID started, where people were locked up inside their flats. So for the first 2 years, we basically didn't do much with the fridge because people weren't allowed to travel anymore, so they didn't really need the solution. But we actually took care. We won the contract to transport all the COVID vaccines in the US and in Canada. So we focused on that in the meantime. But now it's become really a B2C product. It's not, unfortunately, a product that is really good for the pharma, because it's out of the budget of the pharmaceutical companies, because for marketing, they're always going to be looking for cheaper solutions to do the marketing for the medication. But I'm a big manufacturer of isothermal bags for the pharmaceutical industry. It's just easier for me to sell the bags than to sell the fridge because the budget is too high per patient. I've been working with the pharma industry since 2008, manufacturing solutions. So I do get some queries and eventually some business for very rare diseases where they have, let's say in France, only 76 patients and each patient brings in 20,000 euro or something. Then for those kind of cases, they're quite happy to use a Lifeina box. But for most of the people, they prefer to use these kind of bags. It's just an easier solution for marketing to use a bag because they can give it to much more patients than actually giving them a fridge.
Would a company use that to transport drugs to somebody in, I don't know, a different country somewhere that urgently needed drugs, or would they use the bag?
For instance, as an example, I have programs in place where they're using drones in Italy to deliver medication. They put this on a drone. And so for that, it's working quite well. But they're few and far between. So I have solutions that are simpler for bulk transport of medication to users. Nurses, I have a specific product for nurses to transport medications to patients, which is an isothermal bag that is lasting for 36 hours between 2 to 8 degrees. Yes, the answer is yes, but there's a whole range of solutions that is used, not just a fridge.
The other solutions, you just refreeze those? They're not disposable or anything?
You can infinitely refreeze them and use them. I have a 0% return ratio on my bags. And they basically, a normal isothermal bag from MedActive or HealthWorks will last you a good 10, 15 years before the tissue starts giving away.
How heavy is that? You're saying a drone can carry it?
This is 1.2 kilos. So, I mean, a drone can quite comfortably drag up to 14 or 15 kilos. What's amazing is that we're going into other things. I mean, I mentioned a drone because I also have a program in place where I'm working on new solutions for transporting human organs and for human kidneys and human hearts. I mean, basically, you only have a few hours to transport a heart, and there's a lot of hearts that are available, but there's just not a way to actually get them to the right patient at the right time, in the right amount of time. So I'm working on a new project for the transport of organs using the same combination of the isothermal technology and the Peltier effect, which gives me perfect stability in terms of heat temperature. And I'm doing that for the French government, for the French army.
Obviously, for places like France, Canada, US, UK, affordability isn't really the most important factor. Are you able to help with countries that don't have that same kind of income?
Well, I must admit to you, Jim, I mean, running this business since 2008, and obviously I first started when I do the fridges, the market is a little bit limited because of the cost. So I first did the low-hanging fruit, Europe, US, Canada, Australia. We have a big subsidiary in Australia where we do really quite well. For Africa, I've really developed, for Africa and South America, we're delivering not less quality, but less costly solutions. But as I said, COVID delayed me for 2 years when I launched a product. And so I'm 2 years late. I think in about a year, I'll be able to start attacking the South American and the African market.
Do you have other products? So you mentioned Life in a Bag. Are there others?
Well, I have a plethora of products, but they're all different variations of the same. I mean, I have, for isothermal bags, I have bags for 12 hours, 18 hours, 24 hours, 36 hours, different models, different shapes, different colors, because there's not one magic solution that fits all different types of medications. Some people need a bigger cavity, more space, less space, longer duration. We also have a whole host of other medical products, but I do not manufacture those. Those are just trading products that go together with Lifeina. And we have, of course, the accessories, the Lifeina travel that helps you to transport the bag when you take the plane. Even though I hate using this on a plane, there's a lot of people who swear by it. Seriously, I mean, they just walk in the plane and they love to show off their little fridge. I just don't understand. I want it to be as discreet as possible. But some people walk around the metro with this kind of thing. And we have the extra power packs. That's an extra power bank that's going to give you 18 hours more power for the Lifeina box. So yes, we do have tons of other products, but the main categories are the fridges and the isothermal bags, and then declinations of the same.
If you were to take it on a plane, it goes through the scanners okay and gets past customs.
Yeah, although I'm thinking that it's going to change in the next 2 years because it has a lithium battery. It's a very small lithium battery. It's smaller than the battery of a computer. But still, now they're becoming more and more icky on the plane in terms of using. You're no longer allowed to use a power bank on a plane. I don't know if you know that. They ask you to please do not use a power bank because so I'm suspecting that maybe 2 or 3 years they're going to start passing legislation that you won't be allowed to use your computer on a plane either. Just like you have to switch off your mobile phone because they don't like the lithium batteries to be used in the planes. So at the moment you can, 0 limitations, and I have thousands of people using it every day on airplanes. But I'm suspecting that maybe in 2 years the legislation is going to change. But with a bit of luck, my technology will change as well, and I'll be able to use a different kind of battery.
So people aren't taking them on the plane with beer inside them; they're taking their medication.
Actually, it's funny you mentioned that because I have to sell on Amazon. Because as I said, on my websites and on medical websites, I have a 0% return ratio because people buy because they know what they need. They're buying it for a specific reason, and it's well explained on the website. But on Amazon, the purchase has become a reflex. People buy because they don't. It feels like you're not even paying. You just add it, put it in the basket, pay, and you don't even have to enter your credit card because it's already in the account. So on Amazon, I have a 0.47% return ratio because people buy it for the wrong reason. And I have received returns because they say it's not big enough to put my can of beer. But it's not made for beer. I mean, it's just made for medication. I mean, the cavity is actually quite big. If you look at the cavity measures 18 by 6.5 by 4 centimeters. So it's big enough for 1 month of medication, whatever your medication is.
Which isn't probably a medication anyways.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I suppose depends on your perspective again.
But I don't know if you remember when Steve Jobs launched the iPod. He said, this is not an MP3, this is not a music player, this is a tool for the heart. And if you can touch the hearts of people, the possibilities are infinite. And I really feel that when you're making a product like the Lifeina box, you actually want to make a product that people are systematically delighted when they open it. I mean, if you open the Lifeina box, it opens like an Apple product. You have the box that lifts up, and there's a sign that says, you are beautiful. And people love that. I know it's corny. And American people love the name also, Lifeina, because it's life in a box, life in a packet, life in a bag, So it's a bit of a Walt Disney kind of name, but it works really, really well. And what is really important is to touch the hearts of people. And as I said, people love this product, and it's a privilege for me to be able to make something that people are actually grateful to buy, which is really wonderful.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure that you've got lots of testimonials from people whose lives it has positively impacted. So,
well, if you go on our website, you will see people write and they say that it's allowed them to travel with their child, and because previously I was living with diabetes and I was prisoner of my medication. There's thousands of testimonials of people who bought the product, who loved the product. Now we've just scratched the surface of what we're able to do. I come from a medical and regulatory background in terms of medical devices. So the wonderful thing about this is not a medical device. So I don't have any regulatory obstacles. It's not classic. It's a fridge. It's not a medical device. It's not a blood pressure monitor or glucometer or anything like that. So it's actually much easier to sell from the regulatory point of view. But I treat it personally like a medical device. So everything has to be perfectly regulated, perfectly studied. So we make a product that answers to every single demand. If ever it becomes a medical device, it will answer to all those demands. And that actually reminds me, I mean, the one thing about Lifeina box is I tried to make it as universal as possible. So it's delivered with 4 different plugs, so you can plug it in any country in the world. So it's delivered with an AC/DC adapter, 110 to 240 volts, 4 different plugs. with a cigarette car lighter, so you can plug it directly into the 12 volts of your car, and now with a USB port, so you can plug it into USB-C. Unfortunately, I haven't managed to do USB-A because USB-A is just not powerful enough. USB-C is slowly becoming a standard anyway. I think you know the fridge costs about 250 euro. I mean, they are relatively expensive products, but I just can't guarantee the quality if I make them cheaper.
Right, and they last a long time, though. That's also
They
important.
last forever. I recommend that people send me their fridge once every three or 4 years, not because I want to sell them anything more, but purely because technology is moving so fast that the device that I made in 2008 is now a dinosaur. And so I have a thing called the Lifeina Care Plan, which costs €50 or £50. And if you buy the Lifeina Care Plan, even 5 years later, I'll send you a return label. The product comes back. I completely update it, replace any worn components, and send it back to you within 48 hours. And you have the latest generation device.
It's not always enough to have a great idea or be inspired to create something important. You also have to have the drive and the ability to follow it through. And there are many companies and ideas that simply haven't got off the ground. So something that sounds so simple, like Life in a Box, is really quite the major achievement. Great story there. So that's it for this week's podcast. If you do want to get in touch with guest opportunities, or if you want to advertise, please feel free to contact us at jim@deeptechdigest.com. So until next time, wherever in the world you are, I hope you have a great week ahead. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time for another Base to Base Biotech podcast.
The Base to Base Biotech podcast is an Air Coastal Media Limited production.